Good morning, Shadydale Church of God. Today's Sunday school lesson is for week 2 of our winter in our winter book, and December 12, 2021. Our subject today is justice and kindness. Okay, so what is our study going to be about today? People rely on kindness and support of others. King David acted justly, remembering his promise to Jonathan and was kind to Jonathan's son. Our Bible passage will be found 2 Samuel verses, 2 Samuel chapter 9, verses 1 through 7 and verses 9 through 12. However, we will also read verse 8, as I will share with us today again from our Bible Gateway and allow them to do the reading for us. Okay. So the Bible background today talks about David and Jonathan were close like brothers. Jonathan was the apparent heir to the throne after his father, King Saul. However, God chose David to be anointed as successor. Rather than fight God's plan, Jonathan chose to respect and support David. Saul pursued David to kill him, and Jonathan helped David escape, and David's promise to repay Jonathan and David promised to repay Jonathan's kindness. Often when a new king, often when a king from a new family ascends to the throne, he had members of the previous royal family eliminated in order to prevent future uprising or rebellion. But David did not do this. Instead, he chose to honor Jonathan's support and friendship and took steps to repay his kindness. All right, then. So, most of us are familiar with the story of David and Saul and how Saul pursued to kill him, and David refused to uh, bring any harm to him. Okay, and our lesson will get into a little bit more detail about that in just a moment. But uh, part of what this lesson talks about when it says it's going to talk about kindness, I want to add kindness in spite of. Um, it's easy to show kindness to people that are kind to you, uh, but oftentimes that kindness is not necessarily perpetuated or shared in later generations. Um, David owed Jonathan kindness. He promised to look out for Jonathan once he became king. But by the time he became king, Jonathan was deceased. Saul and Jonathan both had died in battle. And so at that point, David didn't owe him anything, but he chose to do the right thing anyway. Okay, so we will get into our Bible reading at this point. Um, and again, it will be coming from 2 Samuel chapter 9, and we're going to start at verse 1.
Second Samuel 9. David asked, "Is there anyone still left of the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake?" Now there was a servant of Saul's household named Ziba. They summoned him to appear before David, and the king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" "At your service," he replied. The king asked, "Is there no one still alive from the house of Saul to whom I can show God's kindness?" Ziba answered the king, "There is still a son of Jonathan. He is lame in both feet." "Where is he?" the king asked. Ziba answered, "He is at the house of Machir, son of Ammiel, in Lo-debar." So King David had...
Okay. Now, our commentary says, even though God had made it clear that it was his plan for David to become king of Israel, David had been careful to show respect to the current king, Saul. This measure of respect originated from David's faith in God and his understanding that the kingship was a role ordained by God. You can see 1 Samuel 24, 1 through 7. Saul and his son Jonathan, David's best friend, had been killed in battle, and David had ascended to the throne. Everything seemed to be settled, but then David asked, "Is there anyone left in the house of Saul to whom he could show kindness, to honor his vow of friendship to Jonathan. See 1 Samuel 20, 12 through 17. David was intent on keeping his promise. When the king asked a question, he expected an answer, and he had dedicated staff and officials records of the kingdom to consult in pursuit of that answer. In turn, it turned out that a servant from Saul's household named Ziba was still alive. This man would know whether any members of Saul's family were still around. Ziba was summoned to appear before David, and he responded with respect and willingness to do what was asked of him. Okay. David inquired of Ziba if there was anyone from Saul's family still alive. His purpose was not to eliminate potential threats to his rule, but to show kindness to the relatives of Jonathan. Because of David's love for Jonathan and his promise that he made, it turned out that Jonathan still had a son who was living. 2 Samuel 4:4 tells us that when this son was a young boy, his nursemaid had accidentally dropped him and caused him to be lame in both feet. Okay, now something I want to add to this, something I thought was especially noteworthy. Again, David's promise was to Jonathan, number one, okay? Jonathan was deceased. His promise was gone, okay? But now he still wanted to do the right thing, which was noble. But look at what it said. He asked the question, he didn't say anyone in the household of Jonathan still alive, because that's who the promise was made to, right? He said anyone in the household of Saul, who was Jonathan's father, who was the king that tried to kill him. And so he went over and above, okay, on two separate occasions on what he had to do, on what his promise was. Again, his promise was to Jonathan. Jonathan was dead. So he extended that not just to Jonathan's family, to Saul's family as well, which I thought was very noteworthy. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start at verse 5. It says, so King David
him brought from Lodebar, from the house of Machir son of Ammiel. When Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David, he bowed down to pay him honor. David said, Mephibosheth, at your service, he replied. Don't be afraid, David said to him, for I will surely show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table.
All right. So David sent forth for Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan. When Mephibosheth arrived, he bowed down in respect to the king. We can imagine the excitement of David greeting Mephibosheth. David's best friend Jonathan was dead, but here was Jonathan's son. Perhaps David felt a connection and the stirring of the feelings of love and loyalty from long ago. Mephibosheth, might have reason to be afraid if David had summoned him to kill him in order to protect his royal dynasty. But David assured Mephibosheth that kindness was his motivation. David would show this kindness in two ways. First, he would restore Mephibosheth the land that belonged to Saul. It seemed that Saul's property had been lost when Saul and most of his family died, perhaps taken by others or even seized or on behalf of the new King David. With the land in Mephibosheth's possession, Jonathan's surviving son would now have a perpetual source of income and support. David decreed that Mephibosheth would also eat at the king's royal table, a position of honor. Some scholars feel that David had an additional motive here to keep a close eye on Mephibosheth so that he would not become a rallying point for anyone who was disgruntled with David or wanted to restore the kingship to Saul's family. Okay, so now, as I said, David extended his reach out to Saul's whole family, but as God would have it, the only surviving individual was Jonathan's son, so it stayed in Jonathan's lineage, even though he extended it past there. Okay, and so again, David said, had him brought in, and once he was brought in, the guy had a reason to be fearful because other kings, could have very well just said, "Hey, look, I just need to make sure you don't rise up and take my position and kill him." But that wasn't David's intent. And David made sure he let him know that. The reason I brought you here was for kindness, to show kindness and compassion to you because your father did the same for me. At a time when his father was trying to kill me, he basically saved my life. Okay. And so I want to save your life. Now, first thing I'm going to do, all the land that belonged to your grandfather is yours. I'm going to have it restored to you. Okay. And then even went a step further, he actually had people to help him to take care of the land as well. He didn't have no feet, so he couldn't do it, but that was going to be income for him for the rest of his life. So now he didn't have to be out begging for money. And then on top of that, David said, "Hey, look, I want you to eat at the king's royal table, at my royal table, so you always have food." Now, when I read the end of this commentary, and it says that some scholars feel that David had an ulterior motive, basically, I don't see that. Okay, and this is just my opinion. Number one, if David really had that motive, why didn't he just kill him in the first place? Okay, if he was afraid of that, I personally think he would have just killed him in the first place or put him in jail or something, got him out the way, or left him out there homeless or whatever. Okay, number one. Number two, David was a person of compassion, and his intent was to show love. So this was just more ways to show love. Because now, even though he gave him the property, okay, as I understand it, he was the only survivor. He didn't have any other family. So if he was going to eat, he would have to prepare his own food or hire somebody to do it. So by David inviting him in, that was one less thing he had to worry about. Okay, so now he had the land to have money to live off of, but then he also basically had David's personal chefs to feed him. Okay, and I think personally, my opinion, that this was a further act of kindness and not an act of let me keep my enemies close. But you can all form your own opinions about that. Okay, so now we're going to read verse 8, 9, and 10. Well, actually, verse 8 through verse 12 now. Okay.
Mephibosheth bowed down and said, "What is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me?" Then the king summoned Ziba, Saul's steward, and said to him, "I have given your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and his family. You and your sons and your servants are to farm the land for him and bring in the crops, so that your master's grandson may be provided for. And Mephibosheth, grandson of your master, will always eat at my table." Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Then Ziba said to the king, "Your servant will do whatever my lord the king commands his servant to do." So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. Mephibosheth had a young son named Micah, and all the members of Ziba's household were servants of Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem because he always ate at the king's table. He was lame in both feet. Second.
All right. We're a little past where we were supposed to read. But anyway, it says Ziba, Saul's servant, would be an important part of carrying out David's decree about Mephibosheth receiving the land that had belonged to Saul. Mephibosheth's injury from childhood meant that he could not cultivate the land David had given him. Ziba had a big family and a large staff of his employ, so they were well suited to farm the land and bring in the crops. By the order of David, and would help Ziba by the order of David and with the help of Ziba, David's promise to Jonathan was fulfilled. Although Ziba would later act in ways that may have been disloyal to Jonathan, see 2 Samuel 16, 1 through 4, and chapter 19, 16 through 30. At this point, it seemed that Ziba and all his members of his household were dedicated to serving Mephibosheth and obeying King David's wishes, whether out of respect for Saul's family or fear of the king. Okay, so again, I think it's a very interesting lesson, and part of what I want to reemphasize is we should always seek to do what's right. Okay, like I said earlier, David made a promise, even though the person he made the promise to is dead. Now, most of us feel like, hey, ain't my fault. I tried, but David didn't do that. David was loyal to his promise to the point that he went out looking. And then when he went out looking and he found, he didn't make up any excuses. He went over and above, in my opinion, what he had to do to show kindness. Restored the land, and he could have stopped there. But not only did he restore the land, but he gave him people to work for him to take care of his land, to take care of the crops, and then turn around and sell them. So he was big dog, right? So he was like the owner and had people working for him that shouldn't have been working for him. But out of the kindness of King David, that's what happened. And then again, he had the luxury of eating at the king's table, which meant he would always have the best food. Amen. So I trust you guys enjoyed the lesson, that it's a blessing to you. And I just want to say this to you. God bless you. I love you, and there's nothing you can do about it. Thank you, Shadydale. Come back next week for our Sunday school lesson where Reverend Nehemiah Newman, our Sunday school superintendent, will be teaching that lesson. Thank you.